Hello, welcome once again to my studio. This is Roland Lee, and we're going to spend a little bit of time today on a new painting of Zion National Park. Well, I go up to Zion National Park all the time. I've got a cabin on the east rim up there, and I've been traipsing the hiking canyons and trails and along the Virgin River up there for probably about 50 years. But that's my stomping grounds, and I love to work up there. The painting that we're going to do today is from the Watchman area, where we're looking down the canyon a little bit to where the Watchman Formation turns a little bit and starts to turn into what we call Johnson Mountain as it turns that corner. Well, we're just seeing a small peek of that right here, but I loved how the sagebrush came down along in front of it and the foothill kind of climbed up towards those cliffs. And so that's what I'm going to try to portray today. I'm working from a reference photo. Looks like this. I'll hold it up. It's kind of small. Let me show it to you bigger down here. And as I'm working on this, it gives me a chance to alter a few things here and there. Now, one thing you need to know when you're shooting a photograph with your camera, it doesn't have the latitude that our eyes have. When we're out on location, we can see into the shadows just fine. We can see up into the sunlight just fine, but our camera has a challenge with both of those things. So in order to compensate for these darks that are down in here that are really not very interesting, and certainly if we replicated the photograph, people would know that we're just painting from a photograph because the darks are too dark and the lights are too light. That's just the frailties of modern photography. So we can overcome that. When we're out on location, we can see just fine into these dark areas. And our eye can see the light and the dark just fine. But once we shoot the photograph, we're just stuck with that. So that's why it's so much better to go outside and paint from there. But we can use our photographs if we carefully alter a few things. Now, I've done a value study over here, a little 3x5 with a 6B pencil. And I've kind of opened up a few areas down in here where I'm going to have some light branches coming through. Opening that up, I'm going to open up a few sky holes in here as well so we can see the sky through there. And I'll have a little bit of light hitting down here in the front where we can see better. But I'm really going to open up some light down in here where it's so dark. And I'm going to allow the light to come through here a little bit by moving these trees over and letting that light come down through on the sagebrush areas down in here. Now also we have some red sand down here that you can't see in the photograph very well. Well, you'll be able to see all this area in here a lot better in my painting because that's what we do as artists. We can overcompensate for the things that are wrong with our photographs. And so correcting those photographs is a part of what we do as an artist. We'll use this for reference on a little bit of the structure up here, but we want to use this one to sort through our values. My initial washes will be just merely to introduce the lightest values and some of the middle values, but I'll get through a good portion of this in the first 30 minutes. Then after that, we'll continue on with a lot of the detail, and that takes a lot more time. But so I'm working on 100% rag paper here. This is Arches cold press, 140 pound, and I have it taped down with artist tape all the way around on Incredible Artboard, which is kind of a nice foam core thing, only the surface will not buckle or bend when water gets on it. So the edges are taped all the way around with artist tape because the inside is foam, it's very light. And I have a little flap made on here that when I go out in the field, I can just close that up and it protects the front of the painting. Here in the studio, I'll just open that up. And my paints are Daniel Smith paints. And these are arranged with my warms here, my cools here, and some earth tones over here. I change them from time to time, but basically this is what I do. Now instead of reaching into my paint wells to draw my paint out, I'll move some paint from here out into the mixing wells, and from there I'll reach into my water, my blotter, which is nearby, and I'll come in here and I'll draw the paint from the well out into this area here. Now I'm going to be using 3 colors: yellow ochre, cadmium red light, and ultramarine blue on this first go around. So I'm going to grab some blue, and as I just described, I'm going to bring some of it out into this mixing well. And now I've got yellow, red, and blue. Now yellow, red, and blue together are going to make a gray. If we mix it all together on our palette, it will make mud. But if we allow the pigments to mingle on a wet surface, then we'll get some very, very nice grays. Now I'm going to bring some water down in here on the surface of the sky, and I'm going to work into that sky area first by moistening this whole sky area. I'm using a 1-inch Aquarelle brush. I use mostly synthetics. I have a few nice Kolinsky sables, and but mostly I can't afford those. I'm a starving artist. Not really, but I don't think that it's necessary to have really expensive brushes. Other people do. I think you should save your money and spend it on good quality paper, which is what this is right here. Really good paper and good paints. And the brushes are not quite as critical for me. Now I'm soaking this whole sky area because I want that pigment to not just rest on the surface, but I want it to, you can see, if I tip it up, you can see that this water is just in this one area right here. Any pigment I put in here is going to move, but it won't move past the edges of where that water is. So if it's beating up down here at the bottom, I'll just tip it up this way and let it run back. And from this angle, you can see where that water is. Okay, so I want that to be all even as it comes across here. Now I'm going to use my yellow ochre. My light is coming from this side, as you can see from that little arrow up here, and it's hitting on this side of the cliffs. So that means the back side of these shadows in the clouds are going to be a little more gray. So I'm going to start with my yellow up there. I'm going to mix yellow, red, and blue together for the grays of the clouds. And I'll just bring some yellow down here. The sky is usually a little yellower down towards the bottom anyways. Now I'm going to come in with my reds, and in order to get the gray, I have to make kind of an orange by bringing this red on top of the yellow that's already there. Okay, so now I have 2 pigments that are migrating together, yellow and red. And I'll bring a little red down here too. And now I'm going to bring a little bit of blue on top of, not adjacent to, but on top of these areas of orange. And I'll do that by just stroking into my wash right here and staying right against these edges. And as I put that blue on top of here, it now creates kind of a nice gray. And this side of this cloud, and on the underside of the cloud, and a little bit here coming across. Okay. I'll have a little bit of a cloud coming through here as well, so I'll bring some gray up in there. All right, now what I've created at this point is just the grays that are going to be in this cloud area. And I'll clean off the excess by just wiping my Viva towel along the edges, and I'll leave all this wet and let that run for a minute and settle in. Now, as that's settling into the fiber of the paper, since this is 100% cotton paper, it's like a rag, and as the water goes into that rag, it becomes moist, and then it becomes like a sponge. It starts to draw the pigment down into the fibers of the paper, and that's what we see happening right now. So I'm letting that settle in, deliberately waiting before I paint in the blue areas, which are these dark areas up in here on my master plan. And then for that one, I'm going to come in here with a smaller brush. I can use a round brush. This is a Loew-Cornell number 8 here, and it's a brush I like to use an awful lot. And I'm going to mix me up some straight ultramarine blue. Now up in this area, I haven't added any new water, so if I put a brush stroke up there, look how hard that edge is compared to down in here. If I put a stroke down in here, it immediately starts running. So I'm going to quickly bring in this whole area up at the top of blue, and then I'm going to just kind of rough up the edge and stay away from this so we have a nice crisp white edge on the edge of these clouds. I'll let the blue come out of here and join with that, and then I'm going to leave a little bit of a cloud shape over in here on this side coming through, and then I'll stay away from the edges of this cloud here and leave some of that showing. Now I'll bring this blue up in here, and allow these intervals between the sky and the cloud to become narrower as we move along the bottom of the painting here, or the bottom of the horizon. See how we kind of have these lines? Well, that's what we see streaking out as we kind of come to the bottom part of our painting. I'm going to have a little bit of blue up here. I'll paint right to that edge. And then once again, I'll leave it kind of soft as it comes up against that side. Now I'm going to open up some blues down into this area. Again, this is still quite wet, so when I put it in there, it's going to crawl around a little bit and look as if that sky is, or the clouds are breaking up slightly as we come through there. I'll bring some blue down in here into this little area that I felt like needed some shape. Okay, so I'm just letting these clouds break up now as they move down through here. I'm bringing a little bit more in here. As long as the paper's wet, we can add the blues to it. As soon as it starts to dry out, then we have to pull back, or else we'll start getting oozles. I'm going to darken up the bottom of these clouds along here, along the bottom. Adding a little bit of red to the mixture. And again, this is an area where I want to get those feeling of lines coming into it, but I also need some darks. I'm going to bring a little bit of red now up on the underside of this cloud and right up into here. It's still wet, so I can do this. As soon as it starts to dry, we're done. So if we leave an area alone for a few minutes, we cannot come back into it again. And I think I'll bring a little of this darker gray right up behind here as well, by bringing some more red into it and a little more blue. This will give us just a little more power as it comes up to this peak. Give a little more darks behind there and make that stand out better. And then back up on the back side of this cloud. Okay, now I'm about to run out of time on this sky area, and I'll start getting hard edges if I'm not careful. So I have to just back away from it now and say, well, I've done what I can do. All right. Now we can come back and adjust that a little bit later, but we don't want to do it now. We want these soft edges right now. It's dry enough that I can work on some of my lighter values down in here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix a little bit of yellow ochre once again and bring this out into my mixing wheel. I'll have some reds out here, and I'll move into some new reds. This is called Quinacridone Sienna. It takes the place of burnt sienna in my palette, but it's much more intense, so you kind of need to be cautious. Here's another red I use a lot. It's called Quinacridone Coral. Now look at the difference between coral and cadmium red and this Quinacridone Sienna. This is much more, much cooler. It has a little more blue in it, and it will make violets. These yellows over in here are going to make oranges. So now I'm going to start with my lightest values, and I'm going to create this color that goes all down through here, kind of an orange that these rocks are colored, and I'm going to use a lot of different yellows, reds, to get this light cream color that's on there. Up around here, I'm going to kind of be careful around the edge. Because it still may be a little bit wet up there. If it's dry, it's not going to run up into there. Okay, now again, these are going to be my lightest values. I'll bring these right past the area where I'm going to have bushes and sand, because this won't affect it very much. It's so light, and so the value is so light that it's not really going to affect it. And I'm going to be careful up here along this edge. Might still be a little bit wet in the sky. In fact, looks like it is. Maybe running a little bit right there, and that's okay. So now what I've got is these very, very, very light, pale colors up in here. And I'll warm that up even more. A little more yellow up into here. These will be my lightest lights. I'm not paying any attention to the dark shadows in there at all. As watercolors, we're working from light to dark because our pigment is transparent in nature. Now behind these trees back here, I'm going to go ahead and bring some reds. And I don't care much about this. It's going to be very, very dark, so I really won't affect it too much by what I'm putting in now. But I am going to have some blues down in here, so I'm going to kind of grab a few blues and drop into that already where some of these bushes are going to be, and maybe even a little bit of green at this point. And these will all be so light you'll hardly see them. But again, we want to start getting these light middle values into the painting. Now right here where this hard edge is, I don't want that to be there. So I'm going to go in here and pick up some yellows along the top of these trees, this bank of trees right here. I'm going to get some of that into it right now. The sky is dry, so, and I'll just let that melt into the reds down here for now. These would be quite dark, so I may as well get some darks into there now. Okay, I'm just going to melt all that together and not mess with it too much more right now. Down in here, I'm going to bring some other colors, and you're saying, oh no. Look at him, he's going nuts with color down here. And it's really not so. I need these colors eventually, and I need to get some values down now so that I can build up those darks in a minute. And I already know from years of experience that I'm going to need a variety of colors down into here to show through in certain places. So I'm going to go ahead and get some of that in there while I'm working. I'm going to have a tree over in here. So I'm going to just kind of scumble or dry brush in some of that in this area. Soften the outside edges with a little bit of water. And I can feel where that's going to be. But it's not dominant enough that it's going to overpower anything at this point. Now from here, I'll take my brush, wet it, and take most of the water off the ferrule here by just pulling it off, and then I'm going to splatter into this area. And what this does is it just gives an underbase of texture, some kinds of textures. Now it's not going to interfere with anything up here because it's just clear water, but as it hits this, it pushes the pigment out a little bit, so we get some texture down in this area. Now it's a good way to get things started. I'm going to clean this edge. This is artist tape, so it's easy to wipe this paint off along the bottom edge and kind of clean up where we've painted right out over those edges so it doesn't interfere with how things look. Okay, see how nice and clean that is? Now, I've got these basic glazes down here that don't look like anything. But what I've done is I've gotten rid of the whites. If I were to spend all my time up here on this little mountain right here, and all this was pure white, I'd never be able to evaluate the right values and colors for these, because everything, no color exists by itself. Every color exists and is affected by the color that's adjacent to it. So all these things are going to have an effect on this. Okay, so right now I'm going to come up and start working on the shadow side of this cliff and get it about as dark as I need it to go, because I can't have anything back here that's darker than what's up here. If it's going back in space, it needs to be lighter. So I'm going to kind of clean my palette out a little bit and just give myself some places to work. And come over here and I'll take a little bit of this Quinacridone Coral, a little bit of yellow ochre, have that handy here. Then I'm going to add to that, since this is coral, it'll turn it into kind of a bluish. The back side of this cliff is going to be a little bit be kind of a purple, but it's got to be fairly warm because it's the form shadow. And our form shadows are always warmer because of reflected lights that come back into it. It's especially evident on these cliffs in southern Utah and up in Zion. Now, each time I reach to my palette, I'll grab a different color. So I'll be moving from warm to cool, but keeping it generally cool on this backside, generally. Now I can come in and put another glaze on the top of this later. I'm mostly concerned with this edge, right where it turns from light to shadow. This little area right in here is what I'm looking at right now. And I'm kind of following along where the main, I'll bring some yellow down in here now, where the main areas of the shadows are going to be, the form shadows. I'm going to come down here and kind of get this whole block. Now right on the edge where where it starts to turn, I'm going to put some clear water out here and soften those as they turn. The clear water will just help it to turn over a little bit. And I'll continue working across here. A few more of these little things sticking out. And then let's make a little bit more of a purple right out on the edge where everything turns. I don't want it too dark, but I want to really identify this turn where that comes over. So I'm just introducing this into it and letting it run. And it'll be kind of dark right back in this part right here. And so I'll drop some of that down in there now. And work my way around. A little more yellow. Now in time you'll get to where you kind of know what the paint's going to do in any given situation. At the start you're continually wondering, is this enough red or is this enough yellow or whatever, and you get experience in time. The more you paint, the more brush mileage you've got, the easier that becomes. But for now, you just give it a try and look at it and see if it works. And if it does, you're good. If it doesn't, try something else. But the watercolor handles consistently. In other words, it's always going to do a certain thing. And once you start picking up what that is, it really helps. Now I'm going to get a little warmer red by using some of this Quinacridone down along the bottom here. Kind of an orange. So it works its way along this bottom. Alright, now that's good enough for now for a base. And now I'm going to just soften this edge as this orange comes up there. Soften a few edges by putting clear water. That starts to make the cliffs turn a little bit this way and that. And then I'll bring some of these really warm reds down into this area. And we're going to have some trees on top of this, but they're warm compared to this, and so I can go ahead and just put this down and then come back over the top of it later. I'm going to bring some more of the orange with a touch of yellow even as we come down into this area that's going to be catching some light. And warm that up. soften these bottom edges because I don't know where they're going to go yet. So I just put some clear water down in there and let it come down. Now you can see how this is starting to create some drama that feels comfortable to us. Now I'll come up and work along this cliff here, and knowing that once I get this dark up in here, I got to get even darker down here in the foreground. But I'll be careful to watch how dark I go at any given point. Darken these areas up. Okay, well that's all drawing down. I'll come up over here, and what I'm going to do up here, this is a technique called scumbling. Is to take your brush and dry it out a little bit, and then rub it on its side like this. And the reason I'm doing that is to create some texture. As this cliff gets closer to us, we're going to see some rocks and fissures and little broken pieces and things like this. Well, this helps us to get that started right now. A little bit of this scumbling over here is going to establish that. And then I'll come in and you'll see as we move along on the next stages of this how that's going to help us. There we go. Now as that's starting to dry down, I'm going to pick up some of these shadow areas that we see in here and here, up in here. And again, I'm going to stay with my warms back in there because we're going to work on the form shadow side first. I'll use this one big crease that's it's a little pinnacle that kind of comes out from the rocks up there, and start to identify a few of those. Darken it just a little bit here, right back in there. Because it's the edge of a cliff, you don't have to get every single one just the way it is on there. The viewer will get it. They'll see these crevices that we're making, and they'll see that it goes like this and comes back. In here, I'm going to make this just a little bigger shape. And I'm looking at these form shadows. That means the side of these rocks that's not picking up any light, any direct light from the sun. Okay, now I'm going to start. I'm going to work on these very, very light, warm greens that are up along here, that are coming down, so that I can shape the edge of this rock, and where the foothill comes up and meets the climbing part of the rock. Now I'm using a little bit of yellow ochre and a touch of sap green, and I'm going to put those in a very light way and leave some of the rock showing through underneath. As it comes down to this edge. So you can see what I'm doing now. I'm defining where the edge of this foothill comes along right here. so I know where to work my way down. Since those will be covered with trees, but they're very warm back there because they're out in the sunshine, they're catching full sunlight, so it's more of a yellow than a green that I have here. And I'm going to bring this one all the way down and come and meet this tree that's going to be over here. And so I'm going to mix up a little bit of kind of a purplish red in here. I want it to be warm, so I'm using a little bit of blue, a little bit of red, quinacridone red, and a little touch of magenta. And then I keep reaching over into some of this cadmium to warm it up. But I'm going to come in here and get this little shadow area right down in here. You can see it over there as well. And I'm going to, that'll be dark now. Over to about here. This whole area will be really quite dark. So I'm going to get that in here. And again, I'm looking at the larger shapes. Okay. And I'm showing now where this cliff turns into the sunlight, kind of along the top of this ridge. And I'm going to soften all of these cliffs now. And put light along, put water along this side, and to make them appear roundish as they're folding their way back along this hillside. Roundish, I guess that's a word. Okay, because they're going to be getting some sunlight over here, so they need to be lighter than what's here. Now this side of the hill going up is also in shadow. So I'll darken it up, and then as it starts to move into the light, we see some fans that kind of come down on that side. Okay, I'll soften this area, this area, this area. Now I'm going to grab just a little bit stronger red and a touch of blue back into here and come into this shadow area back up in here. This is going to be a very important part of the mountain. It's going to be dark as it comes up, but I'm going to use the darks from this to outline the edge of this tree as it comes down here, and some branches that come out from it. So I'm going to do a little bit of negative painting right now and show some branch structure that comes out from this tree that will help to pull this up into the foreground a little bit more than what we're seeing clear back into here. All right, I'm going to bring this down. I can just let that go over there now, and I'll finish this off as it comes down and meets the ground over here. It's really dark. And this will show the top of these leaves as they come over. It's all a matter of just building things up from light to dark and just kind of moving our way forward. This will be the edge of these leaves as they come out over there, where I'm doing this little detail work along here. I don't need to do too much now. I can come back into it. But as this comes down and meets the bushes and it's all in shadow, I'm going to go ahead and get this edge that comes off and preserve some of these lights that we're going to have down in here where the light's hitting. Get the edge of some of this shrubbery as it comes back up. Okay, again I'll soften it. tops of these. As they start to move down into the light, it's going to get a little more blue, where it's going to get down into where the sagebrush is down here. And I'll start to introduce this blue down into it. Okay, and I'll leave that for a minute and let that dry down, and then I'll continue to work my way across here. I'll bring some more values up where these meet the sky, not the darkest values, but some middle values right in here. And then that separates the distance from the middle distance, and then coming forward, I can start to build that up. So what I'm going to do now is just kind of work into this dark area right here and just get that started. Now, even though this is going to be green, I'm going to keep it yellow towards the sky, because we're in a backlighted situation. So even though we're going to have some green leaves here, I'm going to start with the yellows, and then I'll go continually darker. I'm going to use a really warm yellow called New Gamboge right up on this outside perimeter. And as we come back into the tree back here, now I want to soften some of these edges by touching a little clear water out here. You're not going to see hard edges up at the edge where the leaves meet the sky back that far. But now we're starting to get the feel of these trees as they're going to come up through here. I'll gradually let that fade down into some very, very darks that will be down in this area. Down to about this point. All right. I'll do the same thing over here, get the tops of these. Get some yellows down into here, catch some of this glow. My paintings tend to be quite warm anyway, so you're always going to feel oranges and yellows, and regardless of the time of year, that come out through the paintings that I do. I'm going to bring a little bit of this stronger New Gamboge up into the, I'm going to have some trees up right into here that meet this area, and I'm going to have some of that over here as well to balance on this side. So I'm going to just get a little bit of that glow, this area at this point. Now I'm coming in with my pencil, and I'm just kind of redefining where some of these edges are of this sagebrush as it comes over. I've got a large one here, one behind, and then this clump that's going to come down in front of this bank of trees back here. And I'm envisioning some, again, branches that come out pretty far into the foreground down in here. I'll have to redefine where those go in a minute, but I'm just going to sketch in here so I remember that I'm going to have those. Now you see how I change a lot of things because it needs it. I change things as they need to be changed. So now we're getting to a stage where we have a lot of the light and middle values in there. This is where a painting starts to get fun, as I start to bring the darks into it and really make this thing pop. Okay, now that I've got these kind of sketched in, the sagebrush, I'm going to go ahead and bring some color down into there. Now these in the foreground are going to be quite dark because they're in shadow from all of this over here. And so, but they've still got to have a certain lightness to them as we work the rest of the colors in. But so I'm going to use a little bit of cerulean blue down in here and a little bit of green, which is sap green, and I'm going to identify these shapes as they start to work their way down here, so I can separate those from the other kind of foliage that there is there. And so I'm going to work along here, along this base side, and bring in a variety of grays and blues and things that might more appropriately be used for sage. And again, I want there to be a variety, not just one kind of blue or one kind of green. Let's get some variety in there. This one will be quite large in the front, so I'm going to get that all in there. Again, these are in full shadow, so I don't have to leave pure whites, but there's still going to be negative painting going on in here. But what this will do is it'll just help us to identify which ones are sagebrush and which ones are the other kinds of shrubbery and what part of it is sand, because we've got a combination of all those things. So I'm just working now in the sagebrush areas. And equal to that is going to be some very dark sand down in here, but I wanted to maintain its feeling of that it is the good red sand and not rocks or something else. So I'm going to start with some pretty warm reds. Touch a little blue to it along the bottom. A little bit of magenta over in here, and let that just kind of move back into here a little bit. So while this is drying, I'm going to move back again into these trees and do some negative painting up in here. What I'll be painting now is the darks as they come through, as we see the other side of this foliage and the back side of it. I'm going to show some branch structure. Well, it's going to look white when I do it, but I'm going to put a tone over that later that's going to make that look like it goes back into the background. So now again, this is negative painting. A whole bunch of little branches over on this side. This is the foliage that's around these branches that we're seeing, and that's why there's going to be a differentiation between the darks and the lights. So these look very, very light right now and very, very strong. Well, they're not our center of interest, so we don't want them to be too strong, but at the same time, we want to see these darks in there. And This will be our last glazes pretty much, or our darkest glazes on this part of the tree. And I have to be careful down in here and paint around these little shapes. You can draw them in if you want to, or just do it at random as you go. Now I like to, let's soften these and let them bleed into the area that's around them. And what happens when you do that is, instead of seeing a new shape out here, you see that shape melt in to the other part, this other darker part here, and then you see these shapes start to form. Okay, so you may notice now that I've got some dark slate in here in this area and some darks up in here, and even the sand is brought a little bit darker. I'm getting it closer into the darks that we're going to need. Not as dark as this, but darker than what's here. So I'm working into these dark areas. Now, as I've painted down into here and left these kind of light, of course I'm going to come in and darken those up as well. But because I've left the lights, and when I darken these up, you'll still be able to see those branches in there and add the detail that we need. So I'll continue to work that way now, developing this area of interest here by silhouetting this dark down in here. Then I'll kind of work my way back and keep on going with the detail. So it's coming along nicely. We'll just keep moving along now. I'm going to come over and get some of these darks again, using some of my cerulean blue, a little bit of sap green, and I'm going to darken up the bushes down in here. At the same time, I'm going to leave some very light negative branches in here as I work my way across. And no particular order, just some random branches. I'll go ahead and work on that and bring them down. You can see that I'm painting darks, but I'm watching the lights form. And so that's the way we do. We paint the darks for the purpose of revealing the lights to us. And that's the typical technique used in watercolor. Now as we approach the outside edge of this, I'm going to bring some yellow into those greens. And just continue to work in this little area down here. Build up some of these branches. Sticks, branches, whatever. I just need some lights down in here. And this is up in the foreground, so they need to be a little bit larger than some of the ones in the background. Now as all this becomes darker in value, our attention goes more back up in here. This has to be darker yet, but now look at the difference as we start to bring this up. It's looking a lot more in the correct value range. Okay, I'm going to continue to darken right up in the foreground and maybe establish the amount of darks that we're going to need up here. And not go much further. Let's just see how dark we need to go on this ground. Now where the light's hitting across here, we're going to have these harder shadows, especially since they're backlighted. So we want to get these darks in underneath there, and as they pull back away from it, that makes it look like the light is hitting here, 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 and here, but not down in here. And that's the way we want it. Okay, and I'm going to darken up around these bushes down in here. Little negative painting at the top of some of these bushes where the light's going to be hitting along the top rim there. This is really fun when we get into these areas down here and start to add the darks to it, and it really starts to model and shape our composition here. And this is really a fun part of this when we work on the detail. Now, I say fun, not that much fun for you, because you just have to sit and watch, but fun for me, because I get to do it. But I've got this as dark as I want it now in the foreground. We still see the reds down here, and that's good. But now we've got these darks pretty well arranged for us. They aren't as light as we had when we were starting making them just look like that right there. But one of the things you'll notice as you begin painting is that you start to kind of know what to do intuitively after a while. And that comes from experience. A lot of beginners will say, well, how much should I use of this? Or how much water should I put in? Or what kind of brushes? And all those kinds of things seem important at the start. But what's really important is brush mileage. That is, you need to put the work into it. You need to do some paintings before you can come to a point of having answers to those questions. The questions come as you're painting. A lot of students have a lot of questions before they start painting, but the answers to those questions really become significant when you receive them during a painting. So that's why we want to get to work, and we want to just keep everything going. Get paint on paper. That's the key. Get paint on paper. And don't just sit and talk about it. We go to workshops, and I enjoy watching people paint as much as anybody does, to see their techniques and what they do and how they use their materials. But that's just entertainment. Until we actually start painting ourselves, then we're not going to be able to apply any of the things that we learn until we start getting paint on paper. So my recommendation isn't take more workshops. My recommendation is get painting. You'll see a lot more progress after you've done 10 paintings than you will after you've taken 10 workshops. So without the application, the workshops will not do you any good. And no amount of videos that you watch on YouTube are going to do you any good either until you start working. And that's when things start coming together. I've been painting for 40 years. So when people say, well, how do you know what to do here and how do you know what to do there? Well, I don't always. But what I do know, I've learned from experience. And so some of it's trial and error, but a lot of it is just having the experience to make something work for you. So at this point, I'm just continuing to add the detail, the final detail, a few little branches up in here, this area, and just trying to bring some things into the foreground that we started building at the start. Now right up in this area, I am lifting some of the pigment to create a branch where I felt like there needed to be something that came up and crossed over these planes, just to kind of wrap around this side and cause things to come in. I don't know if that's right or wrong, or if it'll help or it won't. But this is the way I'll do is just get a little bit of water on my brush and just kind of lift as these branches come away from this main trunk. Just lifting slightly and taking a look at it as I go. I don't want to have too much stuff going down in here, but I do want to give the appearance that there's some sort of detail. And since I put some detail up in here on these branches along in here, and a few little other places where I just feel like it needs it, then I can do this as well over on this side. Just a few more little details. Again, you run the risk of just overworking, but at this stage, I'm almost complete. I'm just kind of looking at it and just trying to decide exactly how to finish this off. You can't tell from the start where all these are going to be, but at this point, do a little bit of this kind of thing is okay. And I think we're there. I think we're there. Well, I think we brought this painting far enough along now that we'll take another look at it tomorrow and see if there's a few things we need to add. But again, this is the way I paint, and it's always kind of done in this manner, working from light to dark, and working from the distant to the foreground, working from the top down. This is just the pattern that I use. Now, every artist is different. You're going to find things as you continue your painting experience that are going to work for you. And you'll pick up some ideas here and there. But deep down inside, there's a certain style of art that's going to come out. And it's just going to come out whether you like it or not. You can't say, I want to paint just like so-and-so, or I want to paint like this person, or I want to paint in this style. It just all comes together inside of your head, and we're all unique, so that everything that comes out of you is going to be based on what style you have, and that's kind of built in. It'll evolve over time, but this will come out naturally. So don't worry about painting like somebody else. You can pick up some things here and there, but I promise you this: I've done close to 2,000 paintings in my career. And you get a lot better after painting 100 than you did after painting 2. And you have a lot better experience after painting 2,000 than you did after 1,000. That's just how it goes. So the most important thing is that you get your brush and you dip it into some paint and you put it on your paper. And the more times you do that, the more paintings you do, the more you learn. We like to call that brush mileage. Well, you need a lot of brush mileage to get better. So thank you for joining me today for this painting. It's been fun, and I'll maybe see you again sometime in the studio or in a workshop, or maybe even out on the trail in Zion sometime. Thank you for being here. I'm Roland Lee.